and Charlotte Mason talk about spreading the feast and mother culture. Welcome to the diner, where we serve up culture from a short order kitchen. Step up to the counter and let us serve you a slice of mental pie. Not a feast, just a snack. A deep thought to chew on from a big, meaty book. It'll go good with a cup of coffee. Then you get your refreshed self back to the fray with a few new beautiful thoughts to think. It's Season 1, and the Blue Plate Special is Dr. Timothy Petitsis, The Ethics of Beauty. You know, that huge, intimidating popular theology book that you wish you had time to read? Well, have a couple bites of it with us and join the conversation. Hello, I'm Laura E. Wolf, and I'm here with my co-author, Lisa Rose, and we're continuing to talk about The Ethics of Beauty by Dr. Timothy Petitsis. We've been talking about moral luck, and today we're going to bring up the answer to moral luck, which is moral agency. All right, Lisa, throw us a quote. What does Dr. Petitsis say to us about moral agency?
Okay, here's where we're going to start. He says, "Orthodoxy counsels us to repent not only of our own sins, but of the sins of the entire world. That way, we address our responsibility more accurately, account for the influence of anything that might weaken our moral agency, and become free."
Wow. Hey, these are big thoughts, but for beginners like me, what the heck is moral agency? I mean, we've just been talking about how we get a hand of cards and we have to deal with what we're dealt. So, what the heck is agency when you can't control anything about what's happening to you?
Right. And we did start to touch on it last time, but this time we want to go into it in a little more depth. What we had mentioned was that we can start to take whatever responsibility we can, even if it's only, being responsible for the thoughts we allow ourselves to think, or the things that we allow ourselves to do. I mean, all agency boils down to that in the end. It's, that I am only responsible for myself. I can't be responsible for you. I can't be responsible for others. I don't get to choose their actions. I don't get to choose the way they think about a situation or anything like that. I can only choose what I will do. And even that is still limited, like we talked about, by our moral luck. But the more we choose and take and act on that responsibility that we do have, the more free we become from all of those moral luck circumstances and things.
So, we're talking about taking on more and more responsibility, but what does this mean? And, Dr. Petitsis says a couple pages earlier, he says for us, the problem is how to become more responsible, even if that means taking on a more developed sense of our own sin, not how to deny responsibility when our agency has been compromised. So Dr. Petitsis is opening up this nut that we're recognizing that our agency is compromised, and yet the pathway out of being helpless at the hands of the wheel of fortune is to follow Christ, is to take on responsibility even when it doesn't belong to us. And that means this is the unfolding of the flower of the commandment, love your neighbor as yourself, right? This is what it looks like in action. He says also, rather than using our current lack of freedom as a way to justify our sinful actions, we take on the responsibility of even other people's sins in order to see our own agency strengthened.
Right. That immediately takes me to the brothers Karamazov
Mm-hmm.
and Elder Zosima in there, because he talks about being responsible to all for all, and I'll just read it really quick because it's a short quote, but he says, "Take yourself up and make yourself responsible for all the sins of men." And then a little bit later, he says, "For if I myself were righteous, perhaps there would be no criminal standing before me now." And that's also what Petitsis says here. He's saying that all of this stuff that we're talking about that is moral luck, we're all interconnected. We see that there's this very complex and intricate web of circumstances, choices, relations, all of that determine not only who we are, but also who our neighbor is, who our brother is. Because the things that I do are going to affect my family and those around me. The things that they do affect me. And so it's not as simple as I did this, I didn't do that. Like I'm not this isolated individual whose actions don't affect other people. There's so much more nuance. This is not black and white. This is all gray. There is no, you can't have black and white on this, but it's important to recognize that, because part of learning to take this responsibility is acknowledging that the things that I choose to do will affect those around me. There's that ripple effect, right? Like everything spreads out from the center. So every choice I make is going to affect someone else. There is no sin that we can commit that doesn't,
There is no hidden sin.
yeah, even if nobody ever knows about it, there is still an effect. Have you read Our Thoughts Determine Our Lives by Elder Thaddeus?
Years ago. Yeah, years ago
Yeah.
I have.
And he talks about the same thing. Even the things that we think affect those around us, even if we never speak those thoughts out loud to them.
It's funny because if you put that same thought in the mouth of a new age practitioner, people would be like, "Oh, that's so woo woo. My thoughts are not that
Right,
powerful or
right.
whatever." But this is one of the areas where our brothers and sisters who are down along that path, have really grasped onto a nugget of truth, which is that our intentions and our thoughts are very powerful, like to the people around us, and we can't really explain why or how. You can get lost in the mechanics of it and try to come to some fake quantum sciencey explanation of it all, but it's really beside the point. It is simply an observation of reality that we affect each other, and if we want to become moral agents, people who act with freedom, we have to accept that reality and start within our own selves, patterning our own selves and our own thoughts and our own tiny little interactions with the people around us in ways that increase others' freedom and work against the negative aspects of moral luck in their lives. I mean, we were talking about this, but in this sense, parenting, being an active parent, is a profound act of moral agency, because we're taking on this responsibility for the spiritual lives of other human beings for a number of years. And if we're being really honest, one of the problems with homeschooling that nobody likes to talk about, but it's that unstated subtext that if you just parent or homeschool or do this or that exactly right, you can control the outcome of your children's trajectory.
Yes. Yes.
And that's a lie. That is a demonic temptation.
Uh-huh. Big time. Yes. And you will come to realize it, because when we first start parenting, we do believe it. We
Oh,
believe
yeah.
that we can control if we just do everything right. That's why the mommy wars are so, they rage so so strongly, because so people really think that if they feed their children the right foods, if they get them on the
Mhm.
right nap schedule, if they co-sleep or they don't co-sleep, all of the
Mhm.
stuff, they're going
All
to
of the stuff.
raise these children that are indeed very perfectly healthy, and
Mhm.
they'll do all of the intellectual stuff, the brain stimulation. They get the red and the black flashcards for the babies, and all of this stuff. If you just do it right, everything is going to come out perfect, and that's just not true. And eventually you start to realize it.
Yeah.
You start to see your own children are like mirrors.
Oh,
You
yeah.
start to see your own self reflected back at you, but
Mhm.
as much as you see the good, you also see the negative. You hear
Yeah.
your children talking to each other in the same tone of voice that you just used to talk to them, the same kinds of irritation, the same,
Mhm.
all of it.
Yeah, it's profoundly humbling to realize that we ourselves are the agents of moral luck on our children.
Yes.
We bring that moral luck onto them. And so it becomes an even greater weight of responsibility. Well, if I'm bringing them moral luck, I need to help bring them moral agency as well. And one of these lies that I think gets picked up is that our parenting responsibilities, specifically with moral agency, ends when they become legally adult. And now that I have teenagers and, a young man on the verge of adulthood, I'm realizing that the responsibility just changes its nature. I am still, if I am going to help my children create moral agency, I never wash my hands of them. We never wash our hands of them. We're going to continue to do all that we can, to pray as hard as we can, to love Christ as fervently as we can, so that we can inject more freedom into not only our lives, but in a ripple effect of the people around us.
Yes.
It's like that story that you either love it or you hate it, that book Laurus, right?
Uh-huh.
Because, well, some people just, they cannot wrap their brains around it. Like, why would he be responsible? Why would he try to save his wife? Why would he accept these responsibilities? They're not even true. And they get so upset, right?
Yeah, it's as if there's not a recognition, when people react to that in that way. There's not a recognition that he is responsible partially for what happened. He chose not to allow her to see a doctor, or not to allow her to receive communion, not to, go to confession, all of that before she died.
Well, part of it is recognizing, like you were saying before, is that there's not necessarily a linearity to the cause and effect of our sin, of our moral life. You can't just follow it in a temporal line down through the ages. What we do now seems, it almost ripples back and forth in time, which sounds all Doctor Who, timey-wimey and everything.
Well, so when we're speaking about a God who is outside of time, right?
Right.
Like, we are in time. This is what we've been given, that we live within time. But God exists outside of time. And so the things that we do in this life, the effects that they have, don't have to be confined to this time. Even though that we normally would assume that, yes, it does have to be confined, but with God, all things are possible, right? And prayer transcends time. Like, there's no time with prayer.
That reminds me of a story, and I don't know where it was originally posted. I'm sure it was one of the wonderful Orthodox priest blog who have blogged over the years. But I remember this story being shared about a Protestant inquirer coming to talk about Orthodoxy, and the priest asked him, do you have any problems with praying to the saints? And the Protestant inquirer's like, oh, no, not at all. I do that all the time. And the Orthodox priest was surprised. They're like, what do you mean? I mean, usually people have a problem with this. And he said, oh, no. At the end of one of the epistles, St. Paul says, pray for me. So I do.
Yeah, perfect.
But that's exactly the non-linearity of time that we're talking about. Yes. When we're talking about moral agency. When we go down to the bottom of the pyramid with Christ, the inverted pyramid, and we accept responsibility that isn't even directly ours, because we're no longer thinking in those terms. We can accept this responsibility because we've changed the categories altogether. Accepting responsibility isn't about fairness anymore, though it's not really fair to begin with. It's about the erotic longing for Christ. Questions of fairness or just desserts or whether it's right or wrong become so utterly beside the point, because Jesus is at the bottom of the pyramid. So that's where we want to go. And if we go down there and accept this greater responsibility for things that we're always out of our control. But if we're honest with ourselves, it's all out of our control anyway. We can barely control ourselves, let alone the people around us. So the more responsibility we have, as Petitza says, the surprise inside of it is that there's freedom in that, a true freedom. And so as parents, what we do is we forget about, right or wrong or making our children do anything, because we don't have any control over their spiritual lives. All we can do is love Christ and pray greater freedom into ourselves, and by extension, because we are connected, because we stay in these, hopefully as healthy as we can make them, relationships with our children. Like Saint Seraphim said, acquire the spirit of peace, and 1,000 around you will be saved. It percolates throughout creation.
Yes. I think that ties into teaching them repentance, because, like you said, everything that we do just ripples out, percolates, like you said. So what we can do with the time, when we are within time, is we can move forward Like, we can't go back and we can't redo anything. We can't, there are no do-overs. Like, you just can't. And so what we have to teach them then is that when we fall, we get back up. This is what I do. And we teach them to do the same thing, because that's all that we can do. That's the only way that we can use our agency and take responsibility.
You know, we could keep talking about this probably for another hour, but like we said, we want to keep these nice little short slices of pie.
Yes.
Right.
I know. We're already getting longer and longer, creeping into the.
I know. Lisa, what are our questions for our people today
So,
about moral agency?
yeah, I think it would be good to think about the areas in our lives where we can where we can exercise agency, where we can take responsibility, and also think about where we cannot. Be honest about the places where we don't have any say, any agency to exercise. So just recognizing where those things are helps us to focus our efforts, in a more intentional way. So let's think about those things, and please comment, and we'll see you next time.